In the entire decade of the 1870s, across every cattle town, mining camp and frontier settlement stretching from Kansas to California, the total number of people killed in gunfights was fewer than 40. 40 in 10 years, in a territory the size of Western Europe. The man most likely to kill you on the American frontier was not a gunslinger. It was not a bandit or a sheriff or a rival cowboy. It was a glass of water. The water in the creek you camped beside. The water in the well that seemed clean. The invisible, patient, unglamorous thing living in it. This is what the frontier was, underneath the mythology. A place where ordinary people fought ordinary battles, not with 6-shooters at high noon, but with weather and hunger and isolation, and the daily difficulty of building a life from almost nothing in an enormous and indifferent landscape. The room is dark when you wake. The temperature inside this house, this shelter you have made from the land itself, this sod-walled, low-ceilinged, improbable structure that has become, against all expectation, home, has fallen through the night to something just above freezing. You wake not because of any alarm or any sound exactly, but because this is what your body has learned to do. 4 in the morning, maybe a few minutes before. The quilt on top of you is a heavy thing, made from pieces of other clothes, other years, stitched together on winter evenings by lamplight, until it became something that kept the cold out, mostly. On the nights when keeping the cold out is a project requiring everything you have. There is no light through the window. In winter, there is barely a window. You stuffed the gap with rags in November, and the rags are still there, holding back what they can. The stove in the corner is silent. Whatever fire it held last night has been ash for hours. This is the thing you feel first every morning on the frontier. The cold, before hunger, before thought, before the particular weight of everything that needs doing today. The cold announces the day with the directness that the frontier brings to most things. Outside, somewhere beyond the earthen walls, the prairie is doing what the prairie does. Breathing. The wind moves through the grass in long, slow waves, a sound like distant water, like something enormous sighing. A horse shifts its weight in the lean-to. Something calls from a long way off, coyote, or just the wind finding a gap in something. The world out there is large and dark and does not arrange itself according to your preferences or your schedule. You have been here long enough to understand that. This is the American West in the 1870s. Not the one from the paintings, all heroic figures and golden light. Not the one from the dime novels sold back east for 5 cents apiece, all gunsmoke and glory, and women rescued from tall horses. This is the real one. The one made of early mornings and cold hands, and the particular smell of a sod house before dawn. The one where the most important piece of equipment you own is a cast-iron skillet. The one where the most dangerous thing you face most days is the amount of work waiting on the other side of this darkness. This is where you live. This is your day. Let it begin. The world you have come to the year is somewhere around 1875, though the exact year matters less than it might elsewhere. Time moves differently out here. The frontier does not keep calendars the way cities do. What you know is this: the Civil War ended a decade ago, and the country it left behind is still, in some deep way, trying to figure out what it is. The railroad reached from coast to coast 6 years ago, the Golden Spike driven at Promontory Summit, Utah, in May of 1869. And that single fact changed everything about this part of the world. Where once there was only the slowness of wagon trains and river travel, there is now speed. There is now the possibility of elsewhere arriving and departing on a schedule that could almost be trusted. The West has been opened. The West is being filled. The railroad did not just carry people west, it carried everything west. Lumber from Minnesota, cut and planed and ready to become walls and floors. Tools from factories in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Canned goods, something relatively new that could survive the journey without rotting. Catalogues from Montgomery Ward, the first of which went out in 1872 as a single folded sheet and grew, by the middle of the decade, into a book of pages no one on the frontier had any business owning and everyone owned anyway. The railroad made the frontier adjacent to everywhere, which meant the frontier was now possible in a way it had never been before, and the people came, steadily, stubbornly, from everywhere. And so they came. From Germany and Scandinavia and Ireland, brought west by the promise of land. 160 acres, free under the Homestead Act of 1862, if you could survive on it for 5 years and prove it improved. From the American South, black families who had survived slavery and Reconstruction, and were trying now to build something in Kansas or Colorado, where the name of what you were did not follow you quite so fast. Chinese workers who had built the Transcontinental Railroad and stayed, finding work where it could be found. Mexican families for whom this land was not new at all, who had been here longer than the idea of westward expansion, who remembered when the border was somewhere else entirely. The American West of the 1870s is more various than any simple account of it will suggest. The land they came to was enormous in a way that photographs cannot capture. A photograph has edges. The Great Plains do not. Standing on the prairie for the first time, after coming from anywhere with hills, with trees, with walls and limits, was a physical experience that people struggled to describe in their letters home. One homesteader from Ohio, writing to her sister in 1874, said only, "There is more sky here than I knew existed." She was not being poetic. She was being precise. The sky here is not something above you. It is something you are inside. What did it cost to live here? In 1875, a cowboy on a cattle drive earned about $1 a day, sometimes more if the trail boss liked him. A homesteader might earn nothing in cash for months at a time, everything grown, traded, or made by hand. A sack of flour in a frontier town general store cost between $2 and $4, depending on how far it had traveled. Coffee, which was not optional, the frontier did not consider coffee optional, ran about 30 cents a pound. A pair of boots, the single most important piece of equipment most working people owned, cost between $3 and $5, which was 3 to 5 days' wages for someone with work, which was more, sometimes much more, for anyone without it. The arithmetic of the frontier was honest, and it was hard. What the dime novels never mentioned, what the maps showing homestead territories never illustrated, was that this land was not empty before the settlers arrived. The Plains Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Comanche. These were not peoples who wandered across an unclaimed landscape. They were peoples with territories, with economies, with centuries of accumulated knowledge about exactly how to survive on a land that was, for all its beauty, genuinely hostile to the uninformed. The 1870s were the decade in which the United States Army prosecuted what would later be called the Plains Wars, with particular intensity. This was not something you could ignore, living out here. The soldiers at the nearest fort. The news, when it arrived, of what had happened somewhere to the south or the north. the particular tension of a landscape in the middle of a conflict that was not finished. But people came anyway. They came because land is the oldest form of wealth, and for most of human history, the people who arrived too late had none. They came because the life they were leaving, a rented tenement in a city, a depleted farm in the east, a country where your name determined your future before you had a chance to determine it yourself, offered nothing that looked like forward motion. They came with the things they could carry and the things they could not. Their recipes, their seeds, their names for the constellations, their prayers, their arguments, their ways of marking time and making meaning. They came to stay. And many of them did. This is the world you are waking into. Not with drama, not with ceremony. You are waking because it is nearly 4 a.m, and the fire is out, and today, like every other day on the frontier, will not wait for you to feel ready. The cold is real. The work ahead is real. The life you are building here, imperfectly, stubbornly, one cold morning at a time, is real. So, let's begin. Before the light, morning on the frontier. The first thing you do, before anything else, before your eyes have fully decided to work, is feel for the matches. They are on the shelf beside the stove, wherever you put them last night, which is always the same place, because on the frontier, you learn quickly that the things you might need in the dark must always be where you expect them. Your fingers find them. You sit up, the quilt falls away from your shoulders, and the cold takes its place immediately, efficiently, as if it had been waiting just outside the warmth for exactly this moment. The stove is a cast-iron box, and it is the most important thing in this room. It may be the most important thing you own. On the coldest mornings, January mornings, February mornings when the temperature drops past 0 and stays there, it is the difference between a house that functions and a house that does not. You open the door and the ash from last night falls softly. A grey fine dust that smells of pine or of buffalo chip, or of whatever you burned. The kindling goes in first, small pieces. The match strikes on the 3rd try, or the 4th, or the 5th, and then it catches. And there is light, small and specific, and entirely yours. The fire changes the room. Not immediately, not warmly. It will not be warm for another 20 minutes, but the light is different now. The stove throws a low orange glow that reaches the floor, the edge of the bed, the corner where the boots are. The room comes back to you in pieces. The table with its single chair pulled close. The shelf where the good dishes live. The ones that made it from wherever you came from, wrapped in clothes and newspaper, none of them broken, which still feels like a small and deliberate miracle. The flour sack hanging from the rafter. The rifle by the door, which is always by the door. You can hear the fire now, the small persistent sound of it, the wood taking. Through the walls, 1.5 feet of dried grass and earth, packed solid, which is better insulation than you would expect and worse soundproofing than you would like. The wind announces itself. It has been announcing itself all night. On the plains, the wind is not a weather condition. It is a geographic one. It is simply what the air does when there is nothing to stop it, and there is nothing to stop it here. You have stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. And then on some mornings, in the particular stillness between sleep and waking, you notice it again, and something about its persistence registers as a kind of company. You dress before your body has caught up to the idea of being upright. This is the skill the frontier teaches most efficiently. How to do necessary things before you want to. Wool socks first, pulled up over the long underwear you slept in. Pants, the flannel shirt over the union suit, the suspenders. There is a specific order to all of this, and you follow it without thought now. the way you follow a trail you have walked 100 times in the dark. The boots are cold. The leather is stiff with the cold. You work your feet in and lace them and stand, and the floor is cold through the soles. And you think briefly of summer. And then you don't. There is no running water. There will not be in your lifetime in this place. Water comes from the well you dug by hand, 40 feet down through clay and rock, or from the creek a quarter-mile east that runs fast in spring and slows to a crawl by August. This morning you pour from the bucket you brought in last night. You always bring in a bucket before dark, because a well at 4 in the morning in February is an argument you do not need to have with the day. The water is cold enough to bring you fully awake in the way that nothing else can. You pour a little into your palms and press them against your face, and the day begins in earnest. The outhouse is 30 feet from the back door. 30 feet that, in January, feel like a longer distance than they have any right to. The path is beaten down now, hard-packed by the repeated impression of your feet going in the same direction at the same hour. And you follow it by feel and by the particular lighter darkness of the sky above the open path versus the sky above the roofline. The outhouse itself is a small wooden structure, more honestly, a wooden box with a hole in it, and the smell in cold weather is less offensive than it is in warm. You do not linger. You come back along the frozen path, and the cold has done its work on you. And you are fully awake now, whether you intended to be or not. Before you eat, the animals eat. This is not a philosophical position. It is a practical one. The horse in the lean-to, and the few pigs and the chickens who roost in the small enclosure you built against the south wall of the house, represent a significant portion of what you own and what you eat. And their continued health is more immediately important than your breakfast. You scatter corn for the chickens in the grey pre-dawn. They move toward it with the business-like efficiency they bring to everything. One of them has been laying less than the others this week. You notice. You file it away. By the time you have watered the horse and tossed hay into the lean-to and checked the ice on the water barrel, the thin skin of it that you break with the back of your hand, a satisfying sound in the silence, the sky to the east has begun to acknowledge itself. Not sunrise yet, not even the suggestion of sunrise. Just a paling, a faint lightening at the horizon, as if the darkness there is slightly less committed to its position. The plains are visible now as shapes, the black of grass against the slightly less black of sky. You stand for a moment and look at it. This is something you have learned to do. Stop for a moment and look at the morning arriving. It costs almost nothing. It is worth more than it costs. Back inside, the stove has given up enough heat to make the air near it something other than hostile. The coffee pot is a heavy granite-ware thing, grey and speckled, and it goes on the stove now. 3 parts water, 1 part ground coffee, or close enough to it depending on where you are in the month. Ground coffee costs money. You know this down to the cent. When money is short, you extend it with chicory, or with roasted grain, or you drink it weaker than you want and do not complain, because complaining uses energy you cannot spare. When the coffee is as it should be, when the pot begins to shudder, and the smell begins, that deep, roasted, acrid smell that is coffee and nothing else on earth. The morning opens up a little. If there are children, they are waking now. The youngest stay in the bed a few minutes more, a shared warmth under heavy quilts, and you let them. The older ones, anything above 7 or 8, have chores that will not wait for school or inclination, or the desire to stay warm a little longer. You call once, not twice, in the tone you use for everything out here. Flat, matter-of-fact, unhurried, but not optional. The sound of reluctant movement from the sleeping corner. The shuffle of feet finding the floor. Someone has pulled on boots in the wrong order. The right boot on the left foot. And you see it and say nothing because correcting small things in the morning costs more than it's worth. Breakfast on the frontier is not complicated, and it is not meant to be. There is what there is. Cornmeal mush, if the cornmeal is holding. Leftover cornbread from last night, heated on the flat of the stove. Fried salt pork if you have it. Possibly an egg or two from the chickens, who are producing well enough this month. The cast-iron skillet goes directly onto the stovetop, and the fat from yesterday. Saved, always saved, because throwing out fat is something you do not do. Goes in and begins to liquefy with a sound like whispering. The room smells of it, fat and heat. The specific smell of the frontier morning getting serious. By the time breakfast is on the table, such as it is, the light through the paper-covered window has turned from suggestion to fact. Grey light, the particular flatness of a Great Plains morning that does not really begin in colour until the sun is well up. You can see the yard now, the pile of split wood by the north wall. The path to the outhouse, the chicken enclosure, the beginning of the track that leads eventually to the road that leads eventually to the nearest town. Everything is grey-brown and still. Then a meadowlark, somewhere out in the grass, begins. And the morning has a different quality immediately. You sit. There is a particular pleasure to sitting down at the beginning of a day that will offer very few other opportunities for it. The coffee cup is warm in your hands. The warmth moves into your palms and through your fingers, and you hold it a moment before drinking, just holding it, because warmth is one of the things you do not take for granted out here. Ever. You drink. The coffee is what it is, not a comfort exactly, not a luxury, but something that sharpens the edges of you enough to face what is waiting. Something that says, this is where the day actually starts. Right here, this cup, this warmth. Outside, the light is growing. The wind that has been a sound is becoming a feeling now. You can feel it around the doorframe. A thin current of cold air that no amount of stuffing quite defeats. The list of today's work assembles itself in your mind without effort, without anyone asking it to. The fence on the north quarter needs attention. The flour is getting low. Someone needs to go to town, which means harnessing the horse, which means an hour and a half each way on a road that is not, by any generous definition, a road. The list is always longer than the day. You have learned to hold this fact without fighting it. The day is what it is. You are what you are. The work is what is waiting. You drain the cup. You stand. The fire in the stove is breathing steadily now, the kind of even heat you can trust for a few hours before it needs tending again. Outside the door, the day is waiting. The frontier morning is fully here, wide and cold and grey, utterly indifferent to how you feel about it, asking, as it always asks, as it has always asked, what you're going to do with what it has given you. You pull the door open. The cold comes in. You step out into it. The day begins. What's in the pot? Food and cooking on the frontier. There is a jar on the shelf that is older than almost everything else in this house, including most of the furniture. The sourdough starter. Everyone calls it something different. Gives it a name the way you name a dog or a particular field. Has been alive and active and requiring attention since before you arrived here. It came with you from wherever you came from. or someone gave you a start from theirs, which came from someone else's. A chain of hands and kitchens stretching back further than you can trace. You feed it flour and water every morning, a little pinched off before you do, and mixed into the day's bread. And the jar returns to the shelf where it sits and breathes and does its slow fermentation. Smelling, if you lean close, like something between fresh bread and a very mild vinegar. It is, in its unhurried way, alive. Bread is the day's anchor. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a literal, practical, nutritional sense. The bread you make this morning will be what stands between your family and actual hunger if everything else goes sideways before noon. Flour, salt, lard, and the sourdough starter. This is what you have. This is what you work with. The mixing is done in a big crock, the dough turned out on the table and kneaded with the heel of your hand in the same motion you have made so many thousands of times it has become something close to meditation. The dough is sticky. The stove is warm enough now to provide the temperature the rising needs. The bread will take 2 rises, and most of the morning, and the smell it makes as it bakes, is one of the few smells in the frontier home that is straightforwardly good, unambiguously good, good in a way that requires no adjustment for circumstances. While the bread does its first rise, you start the beans. Beans are the frontier's great honest food, the crop that asks almost nothing and gives almost everything back. They require no glamour. Dried navy beans soaked overnight in water, then set to cook with salt pork and an onion if you have one, a bay leaf or a handful of dried herbs from the small tin that came with you, and gets lower and is never quite fully replenished. The pot goes to the back of the stove where the heat is lower and more patient. Beans cannot be rushed. They will be ready by midday, or whenever they decide to be, and the smell they make as they cook is something between savory and simple and undeniably right. On the frontier, beans for supper is not a complaint. It is a plan. The salt pork is in a barrel in the cellar, packed in brine since November when the pig was slaughtered, or it came from the general store in a waxed wrapper if you're near enough to one to have that option. Salt pork is not bacon, though you might call it that for simplicity. It is fattier, saltier, and when it hits the hot skillet, it puts out enough grease to cook everything else you need to cook that morning. You waste none of it. The drippings go into a jar beside the stove. Everything will eventually be cooked in those drippings. The cornbread, the boiled greens in summer, the fried apples that are the frontier's approximation of a treat. The jar of drippings beside the stove is a small economy that runs continuously, giving out what it receives, the fat of every previous meal present in the next one. Coffee deserves its own accounting because coffee on the frontier is not casual. It is serious. People who could not afford coffee for themselves found a way, because going without coffee in a life of physical labor and cold mornings and significant hardship is not a deprivation. It is a subtraction too far, a removal of one of the few things that costs little and asks nothing back but your attention. The beans come whole, sometimes green, and you roast them yourself in a pan on the stove until the kitchen smells of something almost good. Then grind them in the small hand grinder that is one of the few pieces of equipment you brought specifically because you knew you would need it. A cowboy on the cattle trail drank coffee 6 times a day. There are worse habits a person could have. There are far fewer things as reliable. The cast iron skillet is the most used object in the house, and it shows. It is black and heavy, and has been seasoned over years of use until the interior surface has become as smooth as something nearly new. The accumulated fat of 1,000 meals worked into the iron so that almost nothing sticks to it. You never wash it with soap. Soap would undo what the years built, only hot water and the rough edge of a cloth. Then dry it on the stove to prevent rust. This skillet came from somewhere. A hardware store, a wagon, the estate of another household that did not survive what yours has. It will outlast this house and possibly this generation. The cast iron skillet is, in the most practical sense possible, an heirloom. What you cannot grow or raise or make, you buy at the general store, which means you budget carefully and continuously. The general store on the frontier is not a supermarket. It is a single room with a long counter and shelves behind it, and what it stocks depends on what the last supply wagon brought, which depends on the season and the road conditions and the supplier's judgment about what frontier people actually need. Flour, always. Coffee, usually. Sugar, when it can be had. Salt, which is essential in ways that go beyond flavoring. Dried beans. Canned goods are becoming more available as the decade goes on. Canned peaches, canned tomatoes, condensed milk in tins from Gail Borden's company. But they are priced for the occasional occasion, not the daily table. You look at them sometimes. You calculate. In 1875, a 50-pound sack of flour, which a family of 4 will use in roughly a month, costs between $2 and $3. A pound of coffee is 30 cents. A tin of baking powder is 20 cents. Sugar runs 15 to 20 cents a pound, and you use it with care, measuring it out as you would any resource with a known bottom. These numbers do not sound large unless you know that a day labourer on the frontier earns perhaps 75 cents for a full day's work, and a cowboy on the monthly payroll earns $30 a month, out of which he buys his own clothes and tobacco and whatever else he requires. The math is simple. The math is hard. You do the math every time you are in the store, working the numbers against what you have in your pocket, which is often less than you need. What the store cannot provide, the land sometimes offers. Prairie chickens and pheasant live in the tall grass and are not difficult to bring down with shot and patience. Pronghorn antelope are faster than they look and excellent eating. The meat is lean and slightly sweet and changes the character of a meal entirely. Rabbit, which is not glamorous, is reliable enough that some families eat it so often it stops being food and becomes simply an expectation. And in the early part of this decade, before the systematic slaughter reduced their numbers past imagining, buffalo could still occasionally be found in the southern reaches, and a single buffalo could feed a family for weeks. The meat cut thin and dried in strips that kept through the winter and beyond. Preserving food is not optional on the frontier. It is survival, conducted in the furious weeks of late summer and early fall, when everything ripens at once, and the only question is whether you can process it faster than it spoils. The apple tree, if you are lucky enough to have one established, produces in September, and the apples go into the cellar for winter eating, and into jars of preserved apple butter and dried rings strung on twine like garlands. Wild plums along the creek bottom make a jelly that sets hard and sweet and will last until spring. Corn is dried on the cob and shelled in winter evenings by the fire, the dry inner sound of it, steady and hypnotic, filling the room. Whatever game you can get in autumn is smoked over hickory or dried on racks in the wind, high enough for the air to circulate, angled so the sun reaches everything. You do this work with a kind of focused urgency. January depends on what you do in September. The cellar, if your house has one, is your pantry and your refrigerator and your cold storage all in one. It is a hole in the ground, 4 or 5 feet deep, lined with stone if you can get it, timber if you cannot, covered with a heavy door that lies flat against the earth. In summer it is cooler than the surface. In winter it is warmer. The temperature differential is not large, but it is consistent, which is everything for the carrots and turnips and potatoes and beets you have stored there in sand. Along with the crocks of sauerkraut fermenting slowly in their brine, and the jars of preserved vegetables and the salt pork barrel. The cellar is not a comfortable space. It is the reason you eat through February without true shortage, and that makes it, in its damp and dark way, one of the most valuable places you own. On Sunday, if the week has gone well enough, there is something different. Not extravagant, nothing about the frontier is extravagant, but deliberate. The good cut of meat if there is one. A pie if there is fruit in the cellar and flour to spare, and the time to make the crust properly. Corn pudding sweet enough to count as dessert. Sunday meals are not merely food. They are punctuation. They mark the passing of the week and acknowledge the arrival of rest, and they are eaten with a kind of attention that weekday eating does not receive. People sit. They eat slowly. The children are allowed a second helping if the pot allows. This matters more than the numbers would suggest. And here is what no one tells you about food on the frontier. The fact that sits behind every meal like a quiet, persistent threat. The water. All cooking uses water. The beans cook in it. The bread needs it. The coffee is made of it. And water on the frontier. Creek water. Well water, the water you collect in barrels when rain comes, is not always safe. Cholera lives in water. Typhoid lives in water. Dysentery, the slow-moving killer that takes more lives in the American West than any gunfight ever imagined, lives in water. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it. Most of the time the water is fine. You tell yourself this every morning when you fill the pot. Most of the time. The labor involved in producing food in a frontier household is worth pausing on, because it is invisible in the way that essential things often become invisible. The bread, 2 hours of rising, an hour of kneading, an hour of baking. The beans, soaking overnight, cooking all morning. The butter churning the cream by hand until it comes, which takes 20 minutes on a good day and 40 on a bad one. The preservation in fall, months of labor, canning and drying and smoking and salting, working through the produce faster than it can spoil. All of this conducted while also managing the fire, the water, the children, the chickens, the washing, the mending, and whatever else the household requires on a given day. It is, by any fair accounting, an extraordinary quantity of work done by a person who has no name for what she does except simply, I feed my family. As if that were a small thing. The rhythm of meals on the frontier is not the formal 3-meal structure that manuals of domestic science describe. Breakfast, taken before dawn, is the most important. It must carry a body through the heaviest physical work of the morning. Dinner, in the middle of the day, is often eaten in the field or skipped entirely on long working days, replaced by whatever can be carried in a pocket. Supper in the evening is when the family gathers, when the day's accounting is done, when the bread from this morning is eaten while it is still worth eating, and the beans that have been cooking since dawn are ready, finally, to do their patient work of feeding everyone. But there is something else too, something that gets lost in the accounting of hardship and scarcity. In the good seasons, when the larder is holding, and the bread rises as bread should rise, and the beans are perfectly done, and the smell of the house is warm and savoury, and something approaching domestic right, there is a satisfaction to this feeding of people that is real and not small. You put food on this table. You grew it or preserved it or traded for it. You made it edible. You made it, in the best cases, good. The cast iron skillet holds what you made, and the fire made it, and the family eats it and is not hungry tonight, and for today, on this frontier where nothing is guaranteed, that is the whole achievement. That is enough. If you're drifting off, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you wake up. Sleep well. The long day, work and labor on the frontier. The cowboy is the symbol of the American West, and like most symbols, he bears only a partial resemblance to the thing he is supposed to represent. He exists, he is real, he is present in the 1870s in great numbers, working the cattle trails from Texas north to Kansas and the railheads where the buyers wait. But he is not the romantic figure the dime novels have made him. He is a working man. He wakes before dawn like everyone else out here. He eats what is available, which on the cattle trail is a narrow range decided by the chuck wagon cook. He spends 10 to 14 hours a day on horseback, doing work that is loud and dusty and smells persistently and without apology. Of the 10 to 1500 cattle, he is responsible for keeping moving in roughly the right direction across a continent that has no road signs. The cattle drives of the 1870s are at their peak, particularly along the Chisholm Trail, which runs from San Antonio, Texas, north to Abilene, Kansas, roughly 1,000 miles. Which takes about 3 months at the pace that cattle move, which is not a fast pace. A trail drive employs about a dozen men for every 2,000 cattle, which means those 12 men are collectively responsible for keeping 2,000 large, unpredictable animals pointed north through rivers that have to be forded and storms that arrive without warning, and the particular landscape features that startle cattle. Cattle startle at shadows, at their own reflections in water, at the smell of a skunk a quarter-mile away, at nothing you can identify. This is what you spend the day managing. Not adventure, not drama, just the enormous, patient, repetitive work of keeping animals moving. The physical reality of 10 hours on horseback every day for 3 months is not something that photographs of cowboys on their horses convey. Your body adapts in some ways. The muscles of your inner thighs and lower back develop a kind of permanent braced quality, a readiness, and protests in others. Your hands develop calluses on calluses. The sun burns the back of your neck through July and August until the skin there changes to something darker and thicker than it started as. The dust is constant. It gets into your eyes and your teeth and the back of your throat and the creases of your knuckles. And when you blow your nose at the end of a day, what comes out is brown, which you stopped being surprised by around the 2nd week. Away from the cattle trails, the homesteader's work is different in texture, but not in quantity. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave settlers 160 acres in exchange for 5 years of continuous improvement, which meant building a structure, planting crops, making the land productive. 160 acres of the Great Plains is a considerable amount of land for a single family to farm without machinery, which most homesteaders do not have in 1875. The steel-tipped plough that broke tough prairie sod existed, and where horses or oxen could pull it, a skilled operator could break perhaps 2 or 3 acres a day. In summer heat, for 12 hours, driving a plough through ground that has not been turned in 10,000 years. This is what farm labor means. The body remembers all of it. The first task of any homesteader, before anything else, was breaking the sod. The Great Plains grassland had not been turned in millennia of accumulated root systems, an interlocking mat of grass roots that went down 2 or 3 feet, and was so dense that early settlers called it Nebraska marble. The sound a steel plough made breaking through it was described in letters and diaries in almost identical terms, again and again, across different people in different places. A long tearing sound, a ripping of something that had been whole. Some settlers wrote that it felt slightly wrong to do it, that the sound of 10,000 years of prairie coming apart under your blade carried something with it that was not merely physical. Most of them did it anyway. This was what they came for. No accounting of frontier labour is honest without spending real time on the labour of women, which was enormous, which was constant, and which the culture of the 1870s saw as so natural as to be nearly invisible. A woman on the frontier ran the house, which was not a simple operation. She cooked 3 meals a day and preserved food for the winter, and made soap by boiling lye and fat together in the yard, and made candles and made clothes, literally made them, with needle and thread, from fabric she had measured and cut and constructed. She managed the children. She tended the kitchen garden. She managed the chickens. She midwifed her neighbours in labour when labour came. She held the family's emotional centre. All of this without a wage, without a title, and very often without anything from her husband, except the assumption that it would continue to be done. In any town of any size, the blacksmith's shop is among the first permanent structures. Before a church, sometimes before a general store, there is the blacksmith, because nothing on the frontier functions without iron, and iron requires someone who knows how to shape it. The blacksmith shoes horses, which means he sees every horse in a 50-mile radius on a regular basis and knows which ones are sound and which are not. He makes hinges and ploughs and wagon wheel rims and barrel hoops and nails. He works in heat. His shop in summer is hotter than anywhere else in town, by a factor that registers physically when you walk through the door. A wall of heat from the forge that is doing its work regardless of the temperature outside. The ringing of his hammer is the sound of a frontier town doing business, a sound that carries further than most and is heard differently. The merchant who runs the general store is the closest thing the frontier town has to a banker, and he often serves as an actual one. He extends credit. He has to, because cash is genuinely scarce, and people need things in winter that they cannot pay for until spring's crop comes in. And he keeps the accounts in a ledger, and the system works as long as crops come in, and weather cooperates, and nothing catastrophic happens, which it often does. He knows everyone's finances in a radius of 40 miles. He knows who is struggling and who is not. He sees every family in his territory at least once a week. He is often the first person to know when something has gone wrong in a household, because when a household goes wrong, the credit requests get larger, and the payments stop, and the ledger shows it before the neighbours do. Children on the frontier work. This is not controversial in the 1870s. It is simply the factual condition of childhood in an agricultural economy where every pair of hands matters. And childhood is not yet the protected period that a later century will make it. A child of 6 or 7 can scatter grain for chickens, and gather eggs and carry water, and mind the younger children. A child of 10 or 11 can plough behind the horse, if the horse will tolerate it, and can be trusted with the younger children for most of a day. This is not cruelty in the eyes of the people who practice it. It is what childhood is out here. The children who grew up this way and wrote about it in their old age described it without resentment mostly. The work gave them something that was hard to name, but that they valued. The knowledge that they had been genuinely necessary. In the mining camps, and by the 1870s, the mining camps of the West are mature and busy. particularly in the Black Hills, where gold was confirmed by Custer's expedition in 1874. The work has a different character. Mining is underground or in creek beds, and it is wet, and it is cold, and the dust from hard rock mining is silica dust that settles in the lungs and kills men in their 40s and 50s with a slow, airless efficiency. The placer mining of the early gold rushes, the romantic panning in creeks, has largely given way to hard rock operations that require capital equipment and explosives and company ownership. The miner of the mid-1870s is often not an independent prospector, but a wage labourer working someone else's mine for someone else's profit, in conditions that no one who had a choice would choose. In every cattle town and mining camp, there are women whose occupation is laundry, and this work is one of the most physically demanding and least discussed occupations of the 19th century. Washing clothes in the 1870s involves hauling water, heating it to boiling, scrubbing each garment against a washboard with lye soap, rinsing, wringing by hand, the wringing the most exhausting part, the cold water running over already raw hands, and hanging to dry. A professional laundress in a frontier town charged by the piece and earned roughly $1 to $1.50 a day for work that left her hands red and swollen by evening. She was often one of the most financially independent women in town. The economic irony of this, that the most arduous work paid its way towards something like freedom, was not lost on the women who did it. Cash is not the primary currency of the frontier, particularly in its early stages, and the barter economy that operates alongside and beneath the cash economy is understood by everyone and trusted more than abstract money in some cases. You fix your neighbour's fence post. He gives you salt pork. You help with his harvest. His wife helps with yours. The general store takes eggs and butter against your account. The doctor, if there is one, accepts a load of firewood in lieu of a fee. This is not a failure of the economy. It is the economy functioning under the constraints of a cash-poor environment where the nearest bank may be 50 or 100 miles away, and paper money is an abstraction that not everyone trusts. The physical exchange of goods and labour is more dependable than any note. The specific weight of exhaustion from physical work is different from other kinds of tired, and by the middle of the afternoon on any frontier working day, the body has information it would like you to receive. It sits in the muscles, not the mind, and it is honest in a way that other tiredness is not. The hands tell the story most clearly. If you are a farmer, they are calloused in precise patterns that map to the tools you use most often. If you are a cowboy, the right hand is different from the left in ways a careful observer could read. If you are the woman of a frontier household, the hands show everything. The washboard, the kneading, the wringing, the sewing, the churning. The body of a frontier labourer in the 1870s is a document of the work marked by it, adapted to it, in some sense made by it. There are moments in the day when the work pauses, not by design but by the rhythm of things. The heat of early afternoon in summer. The cattle that have been moving since before dawn find shade and stop, which means the cowboys stop with them, because pushing cattle in midday heat costs the weight that the buyer at the railhead will deduct from the price. And the weight is money, and money is what all of this is for. The rest is 15 minutes, 20. Long enough to feel the stillness. Long enough for the body to remember what it is like to not be doing anything. The skill of the frontier is not only the doing. It is the ability to rest completely in whatever time the doing allows, so that the doing can continue. The tools of frontier work develop a relationship with their users that urban tools do not. A plough that has been adjusted for your particular soil and your particular horse and your particular way of leaning into turns is not interchangeable with another plough. The axe with your specific swing pattern in the handle, the slight groove where your thumb always lands, the darkening of your sweat in the wood, is an extension of your body in a functional sense. When a tool breaks on the frontier, which is an emergency with no convenient solution, you fix it or make do or stop working. And stopping working is rarely an option. You keep spare handles, you keep wire, you keep the knowledge of how to improvise, because improvisation is not a talent out here. It is a survival skill. The day's work ends not at a clock's instruction but at the lights. When the light goes, the work that requires it, which is most of it, goes with it. You do not stop all at once. There is always the winding down. Tools put away in their places, because a tool left in the field is a tool you will spend 20 minutes finding tomorrow morning. The animals settled for the night. The fire banked in preparation for morning. Your hands washed, or at least attempted. The specific exhaustion of frontier labour has a quality to it, on the good days, that is almost satisfying. You have been used up. The day has something to show for it. And that simple accounting, that exchange of yourself for something that stands when the day is done, is, in the American West of the 1870s, what a day is supposed to mean. 4 walls, the frontier home, the most common house on the Great Plains in the 1870s, is not what anyone from the eastern states or from Europe would call a house. It is a soddy, a structure built from the one material the prairie has in abundance, the sod itself. The thick mat of grass roots and earth that covers the plains, that dense interlocking system that resisted the plough and was called Nebraska marble by the people who tried to break it, cuts into bricks with the right implement. Each brick is roughly 12 inches by 24 and weighs between 50 and 75 pounds. You lay them like stone, grass side down on the first course, then grass side up for insulation, alternating to lock them together. The walls go up 2 or 3 feet thick. The roof is sod laid on a frame of whatever timber you can get, which on the treeless plains is scarce enough to be precious. Here is what no advertisement for frontier land mentions. A sod house is not sealed. It cannot be. Between the bricks of earth, insects find their way. Mice settle in the walls where the warmth is. In spring, when the sod shifts as it dries, snakes, bull snakes mostly, occasionally something less welcome, come in through the same gaps the mice use. The ceiling in heavy rain will drip, because sod is soil, and soil absorbs water and delivers it eventually. Someone in the household keeps a cloth or a small pot to redirect the drips from the bed, from the food shelf, from the one corner of the floor that stays reliably dry. This is not exceptional. This is what the house does in rain. You accept it. You make the accommodation. The dripping ceiling of a frontier soddy in a May rainstorm is not a disaster. It is Tuesday. Inside the soddy, the space is small and deliberate. A single room, most commonly 8 or 10 feet by 12 or 14. In this space, a stove, a table, a bed, a shelf, and whatever else you have fit in around the living. The floor is packed dirt, hardened by the pressure of repeated footsteps into something almost smooth, or covered with rough-cut boards if boards could be obtained, or with canvas or sewn-together flour sacks if boards could not. The ceiling is low, low enough that a tall person learns to move through the space with a slight forward bend that becomes habitual over months until it is no longer noticed. The walls are dark, the colour of earth, because the walls are earth. Light comes from the door, from the window if there is one, from the lamp in the evening. light in the frontier home is a resource managed as carefully as food. During the day, you maximize what comes through the door and the window, which is often a single small opening covered with oiled paper or greased membrane, which lets light through without letting wind through, and which costs considerably less than glass. Glass was available for frontier windows by the 1870s, shipped in by rail in padded crates, and a family that installed glass windows in their soddy had announced something about their intentions. They intended to stay, and to stay in increasing comfort. Lamps burn kerosene, which comes in tins and costs money, and must be rationed against the length of the winter evenings. After dark, the useful light in a sod house is an intimate, localized thing. A circle of yellow that reaches the book in your hands, but not quite the walls. Heating a soddy on the plains is a daily negotiation with available fuel. In the forested eastern states, wood for burning is not the constraint it is out here, where trees are so scarce that a cottonwood grove along a creek is a significant landmark. A place with a name, a place people navigate by. Buffalo chips, the dried dung of bison, are the primary fuel for many plains families, and they burn steadily and with less smoke than you might expect. Gathering them is one of the children's regular tasks, a basket each day, collected from the pasture where the cattle or the remaining buffalo have been. In a severe winter, and winters on the plains are severe with the directness that the plains bring to most things, you will burn through a remarkable quantity of fuel, and you count what you have stacked against the weeks remaining in February with the careful attention of someone who cannot afford to be wrong. A sod house in winter smells like earth, always first, the base note of everything, the smell of the walls and the floor and the ceiling, the smell of being inside the land rather than on top of it. Wood smoke or chip smoke, worked into every surface over months until it is part of the structure. Cooking fat from the skillet, a warm animal smell that hangs near the low ceiling. Damp wool, because in wet weather, everything damp stays damp longer than you would like. The sourness of the sourdough starter on the shelf, alive and breathing. The lantern's kerosene. And underneath all of it, the particular smell of a house where people live in close quarters with each other through a long winter. Not unpleasant exactly, but human-specific, the smell of a family. What furniture exists in the frontier home was mostly made there, with what was available, by whoever had the skill. A table of rough-cut lumber, the top surface planed close to flat, less care taken with the underside. Chairs or a bench, built with the same lumber and the same minimal ambition toward comfort. A bed frame of lumber and rope strung across to hold the mattress, which is a ticking sack filled with corn husks or straw. Corn husks crackle when you move at night, a sound you either stop hearing or never stop hearing depending on who you are. A chest or a trunk, if you are able to bring one from wherever you came from, holds whatever you keep private. Letters from home, papers of consequence, one or two things with no practical function that you brought because they mattered and still do. The question of where everyone sleeps in a small frontier home is answered practically. Children share, always. The youngest share the parental bed in infancy. Older children share a pallet on the floor or a second bed in a second room if the house has grown to one, which many have not. Warmth drives the arrangement as much as any other consideration. Bodies generate heat. And in a house where the fire goes out after midnight, that heat matters enough to override the privacy that a later era will consider essential. Visitors when they come, and on the frontier, where travel is slow and distances are real, visitors often stay for days rather than hours, are absorbed into this arrangement without ceremony. The floor with a good blanket is not an insult. It is simply where there is room, and room is the resource everyone is short on. In the forested parts of the West, the mountain territories, the Pacific Northwest, the Ozarks, the house is different. The log cabin is the iconic structure of American frontier life, and in the places where timber grows, it is genuinely practical. A house you can build from what surrounds you, using hand tools, in a matter of weeks if you know what you are doing, and a matter of months if you are learning as you go. A good log cabin is warmer than a soddy, because the wood holds still air in the gaps between the logs in a way that sod does not, and it sheds rain more reliably, and it does not breed the same population of insects, and the ceiling can be higher. In the timbered parts of the West, it is the standard structure and the aspiration of those who have not yet built one. Not everyone starts in a permanent structure. Many do not, for months or years. The covered wagon that brought you west becomes, temporarily, your home. You sleep inside it and cook at a fire beside it and live in the 10 by 4 foot space of the wagon bed until something more permanent is possible. In the mining camps, the tent town rises in days, a grid of canvas structures laid out along improvised streets, and within weeks acquires a density and permanence that its materials don't suggest. People hang curtains in tent openings. They lay boards over the mud for floors. They put up shelves. The impulse to make a home of whatever space you inhabit is apparently very old and very difficult to discourage. The space immediately outside the house is not decorative. It is functional and organized with a logic that visitors can read if they know what they are looking at. The garden is on the south side for sun. The woodpile is on the north side, sheltered from the prevailing wind and close enough to reach quickly in bad weather. The outhouse is downhill from the well, which is downhill from the house. This arrangement is not random. It is the accumulated hygiene knowledge of people who learned from watching what happened when the order was reversed. The path between the woodpile and the door is worn bare and hard-packed by use, a groove in the earth that your feet find in the dark without needing to think about it. The impulse toward beauty is not suspended by hardship. It modifies, adapts, finds different expressions. In the sod house, where the walls are earth, and the light is spare and the furniture is rough, people hang what they brought. A picture torn from a magazine and kept through 500 miles of travel. A piece of embroidery from another life. A strip of curtain fabric that is prettier than it needs to be. The windowsill, if there is a windowsill wide enough, holds a tin can with a geranium in it, grown from a cutting kept alive across the journey, which has survived everything the journey brought and is now flowering on the frontier in defiance of its circumstances. These are not luxuries. They are assertions. I live here. I am making it matter. I choose to look at something beautiful even when everything else is hard. A frontier home has a specific soundscape that becomes, over months, the sound of normalcy. The sound that absence of any of its elements makes noticeable. The stove's conversation with itself, its ticking when it is hot, the voice the flue damper gives it, the different sound the fire makes depending on what you are burning, the rope bed creaking when someone shifts in the night, the wind outside, which the sod walls reduce to a low pressure you feel against the building more than here within it, the children breathing in the sleeping corner, the horse occasionally in the lean-to, the particular silence after the lamp is out and the fire is banked and the household has gone to what passes for rest. A silence you know the weight of, have known so long it feels less like quiet and more like a specific presence. There is a particular kind of satisfaction in a house you built yourself or helped build, or are continuing to build season by season. The soddy is not what you imagined when you imagined home. It is too low, too dark, too full of the earth smell and the insects and the occasional snake. But it is real, and it is standing, and it is keeping the wind out, mostly, and the fire is warm in it, and the family is fed in it, and the children are sleeping in it. And by those measures, it is sufficient. The frontier is populated by people who started with sufficient and built slowly towards something else. The sufficiency is not the destination. It is the beginning. The frontier home is not static. It grows. The second room is added in the second or third year, a lean-to structure off the back of the original soddy that serves as a kitchen or a sleeping room or storage for the things you have gradually accumulated. The wooden floor goes in when the money allows. The glass window replaces the oiled paper. The stove is replaced with a better stove. These improvements mark time as effectively as any calendar. You can read the history of a family's years in the layers of a frontier home, the original small structure buried inside the additions, each season's survival or prosperity written into the walls and the floor and the expanding envelope of the building. The house is not finished. On the frontier, the house is never quite finished, but every year it is more itself, and every year the family inside it is more itself too. By evening, when the light outside has gone and the lamp is the whole world, the house becomes something different. Smaller in some ways, the darkness shrinks the walls to the lamp's reach, but also more itself, more concentrated. The people in it are gathered at the light. The supper things are cleared or being cleared. The children are moving towards sleep with the particular combination of resistance and inevitability that children always bring to that transition. The fire in the stove is settling into its overnight mode. And the house that is too small and too dark and full of earth and insects and cold draughts is doing what it always does after the day is done. It holds you. Imperfectly, with all its flaws on display in the lamplight, it holds you. Out on the plains, with the wind doing what the wind does, and the night coming down as far as the eye can see in every direction, that turns out to be enough. What you wore. Clothing on the frontier. In May of 1873, a tailor in San Francisco named Jacob Davis and a dry goods merchant named Levi Strauss received a United States patent for work pants, reinforced with small copper rivets at the stress points, the corners of the pockets, the base of the fly button, because working men kept tearing through the pocket corners until their tools fell through to the dirt. The rivets cost almost nothing to add, and solved a problem that every man doing physical labor understood personally. The pants were made from a heavy cotton denim, a fabric whose name came from the French city of Nimes, and they sold for approximately $1.25 a pair in Western stores within a few years of their introduction. They were not called blue jeans. They were called waist overalls. Nobody considered them stylish. They worked. On the frontier in the 1870s, working is the definition of what clothing needs to do. The working cowboy's outfit, stripped of the Hollywood embellishments that will be added to it in subsequent decades, is a set of decisions made entirely for function. The hat is wide-brimmed, not for aesthetics, but because the sun on the southern plains will cause genuine physical misery to an uncovered face and neck over the course of a working day. The brim channels rain from the face. The hat can be used to carry water to a horse in an emergency. It signals, from a distance, that the person wearing it works outdoors. The boots have a specific heel, higher than walking shoes, to prevent the foot slipping through the stirrup. The pointed toe exists to help the foot find the stirrup quickly in the moment of mounting. The bandana worn around the neck is not decorative. On the dusty trail, It pulls up over nose and mouth and makes breathing possible. Every piece has a reason. The reason is survival. A woman on the frontier in the 1870s wears more clothing than a man, not by preference, but because the social code of the era offers her very little choice in the matter. The layers begin with a shift, a simple cotton garment worn against the skin. Over that a corset, which most women wear, though on the working frontier, the elaborate whalebone corset of city fashion gives way to a more functional cotton and linen version that permits actual physical labour. Over the corset, a chemise. Over that, 1 or 2 petticoats. Over all of it, the dress. Wool in winter, a lighter cotton in summer, long-sleeved floor length. The total weight of a woman's winter clothing on the frontier is considerable. In summer, this much fabric in a hot climate is genuinely difficult. Women worked in it anyway, because the alternative was not available to them. Most frontier clothing is made at home, by hand, from fabric purchased at the general store in the quantities that the household budget allows. Calico and gingham for everyday dresses, heavy wool for winter coats, muslin for undergarments. A woman who can sew well, meaning not just sew, but cut and measure and construct a garment that fits and holds together under regular physical use, is performing one of the most valuable domestic skills on the frontier. The sewing basket is never empty, never finished with. Needles are kept and counted and replaced with some reluctance when they break. Thread is wound on spools that are then saved, because a spool of thread is a small cylinder of wood and can be a toy, a wheel, a weight for the youngest child. Nothing is discarded that has another use. Washing clothes on the frontier happens once a week when there is enough water to spare, and in dry seasons there may not be. The process: heat water in the largest pot available. Add lye soap, produced by your own hands from wood ash and animal fat, a process that takes an afternoon and produces a soap that is effective if not gentle. Scrub each garment against a corrugated washboard, which is exactly as arduous as it sounds. Rinse in a second tub of cold water. Wring by hand. The wringing is where the hands suffer most, the cold water running over them until they go red and then past red to something that aches in the joints. Hang on a line between the house and the fence post, or drape over the available bushes in the sun. In winter, the clothes freeze stiff on the line within the hour, a strange rigid version of themselves, and you bring them in frozen and let them thaw beside the stove, the shapes of arms and legs relaxing slowly back into fabric. Every family that can manage it keeps a Sunday outfit. A dress held separate from the everyday ones, in better fabric, in better repair, brought out only on Sundays. And for occasions that warrant it. A wedding, a funeral, a formal visit. The Sunday dress is not washed as frequently as the work dress, and is accordingly better preserved. It is mended with attention rather than urgency. A woman's Sunday dress in the 1870s frontier might be 10 years old, and show it in the way it has been let out or taken in to accommodate a changed body. But it is clean and pressed with a flat iron heated on the stove, and it functions as a statement. There are things worth doing carefully. I know what those things are. The Sunday dress is evidence of that knowledge. A good pair of boots is the most important piece of clothing a frontier worker owns, and one of the most expensive relative to income. A working boot in the 1870s costs between $3 and $6, several days' wages, and is expected to last 2 or 3 years of daily use before it needs resoling, which a cobbler in town can do for considerably less than a new pair. Working boots for men go over the ankle for support, the uppers stitched through double thicknesses of leather. Women's boots button up the side with a small hook tool designed for exactly this purpose, which children appropriate for other uses, and which is always missing when you need it, and always in an entirely predictable location if you think about it for a moment. The boot hook is the frontier's great recurring small mystery. On the frontier, everyone wears a hat outdoors, always. This is not a fashion statement. It is a response to the sun, which at the latitude of the Central Plains and the direct exposure of open landscape will cause genuine harm to an uncovered face over the course of a full working day. Men's hats in the 1870s are more varied than the uniform Stetson of the popular imagination. The Stetson itself was introduced in 1865 and was popular but not universal. Many working men wore soft felt hats in darker colors that absorbed the sun without reflecting it. Farmers often wore straw in summer, cooler but less durable. Women's bonnets extend forward to shade the face and fasten under the chin, and they are designed around function before they are designed around appearance. And no one on the frontier pretends otherwise. Gloves matter on the frontier in both seasons. In winter, to keep the hands functional in cold that would otherwise impair them entirely. In summer, theoretically, to protect them from the work, though many people abandon summer gloves because gloves in heat create their own problems. Working gloves are leather, heavy leather for the cowboy handling rope, lighter leather for the homesteader. Women doing household work rarely use gloves. There is no practical glove for kneading dough or scrubbing laundry that does not become more trouble than its protection is worth. The hands of a frontier worker in the 1870s are a record of what they do. Hardened, calloused, scarred in the specific locations of their work. They are the most honest document of a frontier life, more honest than any account or letter. Sleeping in the frontier home means sleeping in something. The winters are too cold for less. Long underwear, called a union suit, is what many people wear day and night from November through March. A single garment covering neck to ankle, wool or a wool-cotton combination, that holds a specific warmth against the skin that no amount of quilts can quite replace. In summer, a lighter cotton nightgown or shirt. Children sleep in what they have on, often enough, pulled under quilts and left until morning. The ritual of changing into specific sleeping clothes is a luxury of a heated home that the frontier does not yet provide for most people. You sleep in what you wore, and you wake in what you slept in, and the line between the night and the morning is the moment the fire is relit and the day begins its work on you. The palette of frontier clothing is not colourful, not by choice, but by economics and necessity. Dyed fabric costs more than undyed. Colours fade rapidly in the sun and in repeated washing. The everyday dress is calico in small prints, blue or brown on a lighter background, or plain heavy cotton in the grey-brown navy range that holds its appearance longest. Men's work shirts are flannel in autumn and winter, lighter cotton twill in summer, in the same narrow range of blues and practical earth colours. Festive colour in frontier clothing, the bright red kerchief, the green calico dress brought out for a social, is festive precisely because it is unusual. The contrast with the everyday palette makes it read as occasion, as the decision to be somewhere other than the work. Colour on the frontier is an event. Clothing on the frontier lasts longer than it would elsewhere, because it has to. The knee wears through on the work pants, you patch it. The patch wears through, you patch the patch. The elbow goes on the flannel shirt. You cut a piece from a worn-out shirt's tail and stitch it on. The dress, when it is finally past wearing, becomes patches for the next dress, or rags for the cleaning, or stuffing for the quilt. Nothing is thrown away. The economics of fabric and thread and time, the time it costs in labour to produce a garment, mean that every piece of clothing is used down to its last functional portion, and when the function is gone, the material is found another use. The frontier's relationship with clothing is the relationship of a place where everything is exactly as scarce as it is. Children's clothing on the frontier is practical and frequently inherited from the child above them in age. A child grows out of clothes faster than the clothes wear out, which means the younger children inherit what the older ones grew past, with hems let down and seams adjusted as necessary. Small boys were dressed in short gowns until approximately age 5, a convention entirely practical. Gowns were easy to launder, easy to adjust for growth, and required no separate nightwear. When a boy was given his first pair of pants, it was a small occasion, noted in the family, a marker of age and changing status. Girls wore smaller versions of their mother's clothing from a young age, minus the corset, until adolescence. The clothing of childhood on the frontier is evidence of the economy of everything. Here is something the photographs cannot convey. The frontier smells of its people, and its people smell of their work. Wool holds the smell of the body, and the labour and the smoke and the outdoors, in a way that cotton does not. And wool is what everyone wears through the cold half of the year. A person who has spent the day in the field or on horseback or at the washboard carries the day's work with them in their clothing, in a way that is simply the ambient quality of everyone's presence. These smells are not unusual out here. They are not remarked on. They are the smell of the frontier going about its business, the particular composite of animal and soil and smoke and human effort that is the atmosphere of the working West. Almost everyone on the frontier has one item of clothing that exceeds the rest, not necessarily in quality, though often in quality, but in meaning. The vest brought from the old country and worn only on Sundays, its buttons carefully replaced when they fail. The dress in green wool bought on the occasion of a wedding and kept through everything since, through drought and blizzard and the years that were hard. The boots that cost too much and were bought anyway because they were the best available, and the feet they protect spend all day doing work that deserves no less. These items are treated differently from everything else, handled with more care, stored with more deliberateness, worn with an awareness of their significance that is not performance, but something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. The knowledge that some things were worth what they cost. When clothes were finally beyond use, the frontier found them another purpose. The rags went into a basket for the rag rug, braided or hooked into patterns over winter evenings by firelight. The family's clothing history gradually incorporated into the floor beneath their feet, the material of every worn-out thing pressing back upward into the room as something new. Quilts were the other destination, scraps pieced into patterns that had names, log cabin, 9-patch, flying geese, and each pattern block assembled from whatever fabric was available, the beautiful and the plain combined by necessity into something that kept a family warm. The quilt on your bed holds pieces of the shirt you wore when you arrived here. This is not sentimentality. It is simply what the frontier does with things. It uses them completely, and then uses them again. And the things go on doing their work long after the day that made them is forgotten. If you're drifting off, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you wake up. Sleep well. Small hands, family and children on the frontier. A child of 7 on the frontier is not a child in the sense that the word carries in later times. She has work, he has work, work that is real, not assigned for educational purposes, not designed to teach responsibility as an abstract value, but work that matters to the actual functioning of the household, and that would, if left undone, create actual consequences. Gathering eggs before the hens decide to hide them. Carrying water from the well in the bucket that fits in a child's hands. Making multiple trips because the bucket is heavy and the well is not close. Watching the younger siblings while the parents are in the field. Feeding the chickens, weeding the kitchen garden, which in summer grows with a relentless ambition that must be defeated daily if the vegetables are to have the light and space they need. The work is not explained as good for you. It is not explained at all. It's what there is to do. If there is a school, it is remarkable in the most literal sense of the word. It is worthy of remark, which is to say, it is not universal or expected, but earned through the specific conditions of the community. The establishment of a schoolhouse requires a sufficient density of children within travelling distance, a building or the materials to build one, and a teacher willing to come out here for modest wages. When the school exists, it is often a single room, sod or timber, with one teacher handling all grades at once. Children who ride 3 miles on horseback to attend in September find the ride covered in ice in February and do not always make it. The school year is irregular. The learning is irregular. The children who come are not jaded about it. They are grateful in a way that is not performed, because the alternative to the schoolhouse is the world without it, and they know what that looks like. What children learned on the frontier came from 2 sources, and the frontier gave both equal weight, the schoolhouse when there was one, and the work when there was not. Reading, because reading is the technology that connects you to the wider world, to the letter from your grandmother back east, to the newspaper that arrives weeks late but arrives, to the almanac that tells you what the planting calendar says. Writing for the same reason, to send the letter back, to keep the accounts, to leave a record. Arithmetic, because the general store runs on arithmetic, and the inability to calculate your own credit is a disadvantage no family could afford. And then the other curriculum, the one without a name, how to read the weather from cloud formations, how to identify the plants at the creek edge that you can eat versus the ones that will make you sick, how to talk to a frightened animal, how to estimate the weight of what you are carrying before you carry it. Play on the frontier is the time left over after the work is done, which is sometimes very little. In summer evenings, after supper and before full dark, there are perhaps an hour or 2 when the work has released the day's people, and in that time the children run with a released energy that the day-long work suppresses. Simple games requiring nothing purchasable, running, chasing, the elaborate rule structures that children assemble from nothing, and agree to, and dispute, and revise. A hoop rolled with a stick can travel a long distance on a flat field with nothing to interrupt its course. In winter, the snow provides its own curriculum of available play. Slopes are found and slid down on whatever flat surface can be drafted for the purpose. Snowballs are thrown with an accuracy that farm work has developed in the arms. The play does not last long. It is enough while it lasts. There is a fact about childhood on the frontier that settles over everything else, like weather coming in from the northwest. The death rate for children under 5 is, by any modern reckoning, staggering. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of children born on the frontier in the 1870s did not reach their 5th birthday. This is not unique to the frontier. It is the general condition of the 19th century in much of the world. But in a place without hospitals, without reliable medical care, without the infrastructure that even small cities provide, the ordinary childhood illnesses run their course without intervention, except whatever a mother or a neighbor can manage. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough, measles complicated by secondary infection. These are not rare catastrophes in the 1870s. They are the common background of childhood. Families do not talk about this constantly. They live alongside it the way they live alongside the other hard facts of the frontier, by keeping going. A woman giving birth on the frontier does so at home, in the same bed where she sleeps. Attended by her husband and by whatever neighbor, women can be reached in time, one of whom may have more experience than the others, and takes on the role of midwife not by training but by necessity. There is no physician within 100 miles in many cases. There may be a doctor who has made the trip before for a particularly difficult situation. Though the doctor's tools in this era are limited, and the doctor's knowledge of infection control is inconsistent at best. The most useful thing a neighbor woman brings to a birth on the frontier is experience and calm. The ability to sit with someone through a long night and remain present without panic. This, in 1875, is a significant portion of what medicine has to offer. Families on the frontier tend towards size. The economics of an agricultural household where children's labor is a genuine asset, where the cultural and religious context of the 1870s does not encourage limitation of family size, where reliable contraception is not available or widely practiced. These factors combine to produce households of 5, 6, 7, 8 children and sometimes more. The mothers of these families are almost always, by their 30s, physically aged past their years in ways that the portrait photographs of the era make quietly clear. The body does its work. The frontier asks for the work. The women who survive long enough are the ones who were built for it, or who built themselves into it season by season, or who were simply lucky in a time when luck was not evenly distributed. Marriage on the frontier tends toward the practical, without excluding the emotional. People fall in love out here as reliably as anywhere, and the letters between couples document it with the same vocabulary that letters have always used. But the utilitarian considerations of partnership are closer to the surface. A woman who marries on the frontier is acquiring a partner in the enormous joint project of survival. A man who marries is acquiring someone to run the domestic operation without which the farm cannot function. The best frontier marriages, judging from the documents that survive, are genuine partnerships. Two people who respect each other's competence and divide the work according to ability and inclination, rather than role alone. They do not always say so directly. The division of labor says it for them. A married woman on the frontier in the 1870s has limited legal standing in a way that the practical realities of her life do not reflect. Under the common law doctrine of coverture, still operative in most states, a married woman's legal identity is subsumed into her husband's. She cannot own property independently, cannot sign contracts, cannot sue in her own name. The property she brings to the marriage becomes his. The wages she earns from her own labor, from the eggs sold at the store, from the sewing she does for pay, from the laundry she takes in, are legally his. Wyoming Territory had extended women the vote in 1869, and several other Western territories were experimenting with women's legal rights in ways the Eastern states were not. But the law as lived daily on most homesteads is still the older law. A woman's security is her husband's health and goodwill and continued presence, and the frontier subtracts 2 of those 3 regularly. The frontier father is often physically absent in ways that the accounting of family life does not always capture. A cattle drive takes 3 months. Field work in planting season and harvest season takes all available daylight. The business trip to the county seat takes 2 days by wagon each way. What this means in practice is that women manage the household and the children more hours of the day and more days of the year than the word partnership might suggest. The father's presence, when it is present, is usually authoritative. Decisions are his by convention, if not always by actual knowledge of the specific situation at hand. The children of the frontier often know their fathers as men who worked hard and were tired and present on Sundays, which is both a limitation of the relationship and, by the standards of its era, a more or less normal one. What the frontier family is almost always missing is the extended network that the origin place provided. The grandmother who knew the family remedies. The uncle who could lend the horse. The neighbors you had known for 20 years. These people are still in Pennsylvania, in Germany, in Virginia, wherever it was you came from. And their absence is felt most acutely in the moments when you need them most. A child sick in the night and no one to ask. A difficult decision and no elder to consult. The death of someone in the household and no family to grieve with. Letters travel slowly. News of a grandchild's birth arrives 2 months after the birth. News of a death arrives after the grieving has already been done alone. The frontier family is a smaller unit than families are designed to be, and they feel that smallness. The loneliness specific to women on the frontier is the most documented kind in the surviving record, for the obvious reason that women kept the diaries and wrote the letters. Men's loneliness on the cattle trail or in the mining camp was cushioned by the company of other men, rough and competitive as that company might be. The woman on the homestead might see another woman once a week or once a month or, in the more isolated claims, rarely enough that the arrival of a neighbor wife walking across the field felt like the arrival of a different kind of weather. Better weather, something the lungs had been waiting for. They write to each other with an urgency that makes sense only if you understand what the letters were doing, sustaining a connection that the distance had otherwise interrupted, keeping alive something that without effort would simply close over, like ice over a spring. The letter home, and there is almost always a letter home, from the woman on the frontier to the family left behind, is a managed document. It tells the truth selectively. It describes the land and the weather and the children's growth. It asks after the people at home. It does not always describe the hardship in full, because there is a pride that modulates what is sent. A reluctance to produce worry in the people who are now too far away to help, or worse, to produce the quiet satisfaction of those who said it would be too hard. The frontier letter home is the truth in the key the writer has chosen to play it in. Honest about the broad shape of the life, selective about the darker details, always ending with something that sounds like optimism, even when optimism is not quite what is felt. Christmas on the frontier is a negotiation between the holiday as remembered and the holiday as achievable with what is here. A tree might be cut from the creek bank cottonwood if nothing better offers. Decorations are made from what is available, strips of coloured paper from the almanac, a bit of ribbon preserved for exactly this purpose, the small coloured glass balls that came with you from somewhere and survived the journey, wrapped in a shirt in the bottom of the trunk. The Christmas meal is the best the household can manage, which varies from year to year, from household to household. In good years, roasted chicken or a goose, a pie of preserved fruit, a pudding of some kind. In hard years, the same beans as always, but on the good dishes, with the family together, which is the irreducible minimum of the occasion, and is enough. The people who grew up on the frontier in the 1870s and wrote about it in their old age returned to certain images again and again. The space, the unbounded space of it, the sky that seemed designed to demonstrate the concept of unlimited, the cold in the soddies, the warmth in the soddies, the smell of bread, the meadowlark at dawn, the particular quality of Sunday mornings, the games in the summer evenings when the work was done, and the light lasted late, and nothing was required of you for the next hour, except to be young and in the open air. What they remembered least, or chose least to put on paper, was the fear, the silent arithmetic of the flour barrel in February, the prayer over the sick child at 2 a.m. Memory makes its selections. The selections tend toward the things that can be told without cost. And yet what the letters say, again and again, between the accounts of hardship and loss, is something that does not quite translate out of the specific context that produced it. There is something here, a quality of life that is not available in the same form anywhere else. The land under your feet is yours, legally, permanently, in a way that land was not available to most of the people who made the journey. The sky is enormous and the air is clean, and the work is hard, but the work is yours. The children growing up here will inherit something that the parents did not inherit, something that was built, season by difficult season, from almost nothing. This is what brought people here. This is what kept them here, even when keeping them required everything they had. The frontier was hard. The frontier was theirs. These two facts lived together in the same house, and somehow they were enough. The town, community and social life on the frontier. A frontier town in the 1870s comes into existence for a reason that can usually be named specifically. This is where the railroad terminus is, or the river crossing, or the point where the cattle trail meets the buyers who have come this far by rail. Someone needed to be somewhere, and then someone else needed to be near the first person, and then the third person needed the first two to exist as a community before they would come. And within a few seasons the town is real enough to have a name and a newspaper and a dispute about who owns the land the main street is built on. The cattle towns of Kansas, Abilene, Dodge City, Wichita, grew where the railhead met the cattle trail, because that intersection had commercial value, and value draws people the way water draws animals in dry country. Within 2 or 3 seasons, what was a gathering point becomes something with permanence. The general store is the center of community life in the frontier town. In the same way a village square is the center of community life in the old European model, which is to say, not because anyone planned it that way, but because it is where everyone comes regularly for things they need. You come for flour and stay for 15 minutes because the merchant has news of the Patterson family, who had something happen last week that the report was unclear on, but was clearly significant. You mentioned that your wagon wheel is making a sound it did not make before. The man beside you at the counter had the same sound last spring and knows exactly what it is. You leave 20 minutes later with flour and a diagnosis for the wheel and information about the Pattersons. This is how the frontier town thinks and communicates, through the accretion of small exchanges, through the counter where everyone stands and the conversations that form there. The saloon is not what the dime novels have made it. It is not a place of constant violence, of gunfighters facing each other across sticky floors at high noon, of the 6-gun settling arguments that conversation left unresolved. The saloon in a frontier town in the 1870s is a place of drinking, which is true enough, and of conversation, which is the point, and of card games that are mostly social rather than ruinous, and of the particular gregariousness of men who have spent the working week largely alone with animals and weather. The violence that occurs in frontier saloons, and it occurs, is typically the result of alcohol and a specific grievance, not the abstract violence of romantic legend. Most evenings end with people walking home, somewhat less steadily than they arrived. The saloon's main function is the one that all gathering places serve, to make the isolation of the frontier temporarily smaller. The church on the frontier arrives as soon as there are enough people to want it, and sometimes before there is a building. A circuit preacher rides in on a schedule, every second Sunday or once a month, and the congregation meets in a home or a barn or the general store, standing or sitting on whatever surfaces are available. The denomination depends on who arrived first and who came in the subsequent waves. Methodists followed the frontier westward with particular energy. Baptists were strong in the southern plains. Lutherans and Catholics arrived with the German and Scandinavian and Irish immigrants who came in large numbers. The church is not only theology. It is the weekly gathering, the community calendar, the frame around the social year. Sunday service is where you see everyone, are seen yourself, and conduct the informal social business of the community in the hour before and the hour after. Mail arrives by rider, or by stage, or eventually by train, and its arrival is not a minor occasion. It is an anticipation that has been building since the last delivery. The letter from your sister in Pennsylvania. The catalogue from Montgomery Ward that you will read 10 times before deciding what to order, and then not order it because the money went elsewhere. The newspaper from Chicago or St. Louis, 3 weeks old when it arrives, but containing the news of the world you have been temporarily disconnected from. The post office function in most frontier towns is kept in the general store, the postmaster being the merchant or his wife, the mail distributed when you come in for your other business. You do not always have mail. Many weeks there is nothing in the slot that has your name on it. But you go and ask anyway, because the asking is the connection, the act of presenting yourself to the possibility of news. The community dance is the social peak of the frontier year, and it occurs whenever there is occasion, and a space large enough, a barn usually, with the animals cleared and the floor swept, lanterns hung from the rafters that sway with the movement of people below. Music comes from whoever can play, because in a frontier community, whoever can play is drafted without ceremony. A fiddle, always if one can be found, because the fiddle is portable and durable and seems to follow settlement the way settlers follow land. A harmonica, a banjo. The dancing is not formal. It is energetic and floor-level and participatory, and everyone who can walk joins in. Single men dance with each other for lack of other partners, which no one finds remarkable. Children dance at the edges until they fall asleep in a corner on someone's coat. The dance goes on until midnight or later, and the drive home in the dark is cold, and the wagon creaks, and the stars are enormous and no one minds. The barn raising is the frontier's most eloquent demonstration of community economics, the fact that a group can do what no individual can, quickly, and that the group does this not as charity, but as mutual investment. One family cannot quickly raise a large barn. The timber is heavy, and the structure complex, and the need is urgent, because a barn standing before winter is a necessity, not an improvement. But 30 families can raise a barn in a day. They arrive before dawn with tools. The frame goes up in sections. There is a system, largely unspoken, by which the experienced men work the heights and the less experienced work below, and children carry and fetch and are kept busy and away from the places where they could get hurt. Food arrives at midday, more food than ordinary days produce, brought by the women and laid out on boards. By sunset, a structure exists that did not exist at sunrise. The barn raising feeds on the knowledge that next year or the year after, it will be someone else's turn. When someone in the community is sick, genuinely sick, the kind that requires the bed and removes a person from the work that sustains the household, the community responds with a practical generosity that has no formal name but is fully understood. Neighbors bring food because a household whose primary worker is down cannot feed itself effectively. Someone takes the children for the day or comes to watch them in the house. Someone does the essential animal feeding that cannot be deferred. The help arrives without being asked for in the way that formal requests require, because the need announces itself through the ordinary signs, the absence of smoke from the chimney at the usual time, the unfinished task visible from the road, the news that travels the way news travels on the frontier, which is faster than you would expect when it concerns something that affects the whole community. And here is something the popular mythology of the American West consistently omits. The West in the 1870s is ethnically and racially more complex than the story it later told about itself. The black cowboys who rode the cattle trails north from Texas represent something close to 15% of the working cowboy population. Men with the same skills and doing the same work as everyone else, in a context where practical ability was the primary currency. Nat Love, born into slavery in Tennessee and freed at the end of the Civil War, became one of the most skilled cowboys on the Chisholm Trail. Bill Pickett, whose family settled in Texas after emancipation, invented rodeo techniques still used today. These men are largely absent from the mythology that the subsequent century constructed. The Chinese workers who built the Transcontinental Railroad and remained in the western towns and cities afterward, operating laundries and restaurants and small businesses, subject to official discrimination that would periodically turn violent, are part of the frontier that the popular story also mostly left out. The frontier newspaper, and most established frontier towns have one by the mid-1870s, is edited and printed by a single person or family, on a small press, on whatever paper can be obtained, often published weekly. The edition might be 4 pages, 2 columns to a page, and it contains local news. Who arrived in town this week? Who sold their claim? What is for sale? What the county commissioners argued about at their last meeting? The weather as the editor understands it, and whatever national news arrived by telegraph. The telegraph, that thin wire stretched impossibly across the plains, which preceded the railroad in many places and represented the first time the frontier was connected to everywhere at the speed of thought. The newspaper is not just information, it is evidence of permanence. A town with a newspaper has decided it is staying. The code of frontier hospitality is genuine in most places and most circumstances, because the logic of it is the logic of self-interest properly understood. A stranger who arrives at a homestead at nightfall is offered what there is. A meal, a place to sleep in the barn or on the floor, coffee in the morning, and a cordial goodbye. This is not altruism in the abstract. It is the application of a principle everyone knows from their own experience. The frontier is large, the people are few, and the distance between one human being and the next can be, in the wrong season and the wrong weather, the difference between survival and not. You might be the stranger at someone else's door next February. The obligation to receive a stranger is not written in any book of the frontier. It does not need to be. The frontier has already written it everywhere else. The friendships between women on the frontier are the emotional architecture of the place, the structure that makes the rest of it habitable. Two women whose homesteads are 5 miles apart may see each other once a week if circumstances are kind, or once a month if they are not. But when they meet, they carry with them the accumulated weight of all of the days since the last meeting, and the conversation covers ground that goes deeper and moves faster than conversation in easier circumstances might. They share the knowledge that is not in any catalogue or almanac, which herbs from the creek bottom actually reduce a fever, which neighbour's husband drinks in a way that means trouble, how to tell when the baby is sick enough to require the doctor's trip, and when it is sick in the ordinary way that can be managed. These friendships last for life. The letters that document them, kept for decades in trunks, are among the most honest records of what the frontier actually felt like from inside. What people talked about on the frontier covered the full range of human concern, from the immediately practical to the genuinely philosophical, the price of cattle at the Kansas railhead this season, the condition of the road after the spring floods, whether the Hendersons were going to make it through the winter given what their cellar was reported to contain. But also the political questions that the 1870s raised with urgency, Reconstruction and what it meant, the question of what rights would actually be extended to whom and where, the growing conflict between the large cattle operations and the small homesteaders who were fencing the open range. These conversations happened at the store counter, and over fences, and after church, and at the dance, and they were the conversations of people who understood they were present at the making of a place, and who disagreed substantially about how it should be made. Sunday on the frontier is a day of a different quality than the rest of the week, even for people who are not formally observant. The big work is deferred. The family is together for longer than any other day allows. The meal is better. Children, not required for fieldwork, have an afternoon of relative freedom, which produces the dual experience of watching them play, a pleasure, and not knowing exactly where they are at any given moment, a mild ongoing anxiety. Neighbours visit. The afternoon is long in summer and short in winter, and in both cases it ends with the descent into Sunday evening, which has a particular quality on the frontier, quieter than the rest of the week and slower, and already leaning toward the week ahead, already beginning to gather itself for Monday's requirements. Beyond the rhythm of Sundays, the frontier community marks the year with what it has. The 4th of July in the cattle towns is a genuine occasion, a procession of whatever is available, a picnic on the grass outside town, a competition of skills, shooting, roping, racing the horses that have been working all year, and deserve perhaps to run for something other than necessity, a speech by whoever is willing to give one. Thanksgiving, observed at home with the best meal the household can produce, is a quiet acknowledgement of having survived another year, and of what that survival cost. These are not the elaborate festivals of cities with resources. They are the celebrations of a community organized around work, and they taste accordingly of rest, brief, specific, all the sweeter for its brevity. There is a thing that happens slowly, to people who stay on the frontier long enough. They belong to it, in the specific way that you belong to a place that has asked a great deal of you and received what it asked. The neighbour you helped when their child was sick, who helped you when your roof came off in the November storm, is something more than a neighbour after a few years of that. The community that formed around the church and the general store and the school, if the school exists, is something more than an aggregation of strangers who happen to file homestead claims in the same territory. It is a fabric, woven slowly and imperfectly, of mutual dependency and shared difficulty and the particular kind of knowledge that comes from watching each other survive the same things. This is not city community, with its density and its anonymity, but it is real. On the frontier, real is what matters most. The big open, land and weather. The first time a person sees the Great Plains, coming from the east by wagon or by train, passing through the last of the forested hill country, and emerging, without warning, into the flat open, it does not feel like arriving somewhere. It feels like stepping out of something. The trees stop, the hills stop, the sky doubles in size instantly, which is not geometrically possible and is exactly what happens. A letter written by a Norwegian immigrant in 1873, on his third day into the Nebraska prairie, says only, "It is nothing and everything." This is not a confusion of words. It is a precise description. The plains are not empty. They are full of grass and wind and sky, full of an enormousness that has no human scale. They are full of nothing human, which is the thing that new arrivals feel first and feel longest. The wind on the Great Plains is not a weather condition. It is a geographic one. The plains are flat, which means there is nothing to slow the air moving across them. No hill to redirect it, no forest to break it, nothing between the wind and the horizon it is moving toward. On the Great Plains, the wind moves with a steadiness and a persistence that is simply the background condition of everything done outdoors. A light wind in summer is pleasant, just cooling enough to make the work bearable. The same wind in winter, carrying temperature from the Canadian north, is dangerous. It drives cold through clothing that would be sufficient in still air. It drives snow horizontally in blizzards until visibility drops to nothing. In drought years, it picks up the topsoil, the accumulated depth of 10,000 years of prairie, and carries it, all of it, to somewhere east. The wind is not malicious. It simply does not know you are there. The sky on the plains is the most consistently discussed feature of the landscape in the letters and diaries of the 1870s settlers. And yet it resists description because the problem is scale. A sky that runs from horizon to horizon without interruption, no hill, no building tall enough to matter, no tree line to give it an edge, is a sky that behaves differently from a sky over a landscape that has limits. In the morning, the light changes across the entire dome of it simultaneously. The sun comes up behind the flat edge of the world and illuminates a hemisphere of air that transitions from black to grey to blue by degrees that are entirely visible from where you stand, nowhere to look that is not in the process of becoming the day. In the afternoon, the thunderheads build on the western horizon with an architectural ambition that flatland visibility makes fully readable from 50 miles away. You watch the storm coming for 3 hours before it arrives. Summer on the southern plains means heat that is not a weather event but a sustained condition. Weeks of temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes above 100, under a sky that offers no shade, because there is nothing of sufficient height to cast shade on the flat grass country. The heat arrives by 8 in the morning and does not relent until well after sunset. Work that must be done outdoors is done before 10 and after 4. if the schedule allows for that luxury, and the hours between belong to whatever shade exists. The south side of the house, the lean-to, the narrow ribbon of shadow beside the soddy wall. The inside of a sod house in summer is cooler than outside. The earth walls hold the night's coolness longer than any other building material available on the plains. This becomes, in summer, the most appreciated feature of a structure that has few other advantages over a frame construction. The drought years on the Great Plains are not remembered as hard seasons. They are remembered as the years that decided who stayed. A drought on the plains is not the temporary absence of rain. It is a sequence of seasons in which rain does not come in sufficient quantity, in which the creek drops and then stops, in which the well drops and has to be dug deeper, in which the grass turns brown beginning in July and stays brown through September, in which the crops fail, first in the low-lying areas and then everywhere. The drought years of the 1870s, which intensified as the decade progressed, drove many homesteaders off their claims and back east, or to start again somewhere new. The people who stayed were the people with reserves enough to absorb the loss, or the stubbornness to refuse movement, or both, and sometimes the combination of the two is what survival has always required. The tornado is the plains' most theatrical violence. It announces itself in a specific light, the yellow-green cast to the afternoon sky that precedes it, which long-time residents learn to recognize as distinct from any other light, a color that no other condition in nature produces. The sound described in accounts of the era with a consistency that suggests it is real rather than constructed, a roar that begins at the edge of hearing and grows into something immediate and physical, like a freight train that has left the track and is coming across the field. A tornado in Kansas in the 1870s has no warning system, no organized community response, no siren. There is the sky and what you know about the sky and the visible funnel, and the direction it is moving, and the number of seconds between now and then. Cellars are the response, the heavy door in the earth that you pull shut over yourself, while whatever the tornado decides to do happens above you. And then afterward the sound stops, and the particular quiet that follows is one of the stranger experiences the frontier provides. If the tornado is the plains' most dramatic violence, the blizzard is its most dangerous. A plains blizzard can arrive with a speed that experienced settlers describe with consistent disbelief, even in old age. A morning that is cold but clear becomes, by noon, a wall of white from the northwest moving at 30 miles an hour, dropping visibility to the length of your arm within minutes of arrival. Livestock caught outside in a blizzard die. People caught outside, a short distance from shelter, a distance they have walked hundreds of times, can die when the whiteout removes the visual information that told them which direction shelter was. People have died between their house and their barn. The rope tied from the house to the barn before winter, for navigation in exactly this scenario, is one of the small technologies of frontier survival that costs almost nothing and saves lives in the years when the blizzard decides to be what blizzards on the plains can be. Winter's demands on the frontier are total and continuous. The wood or chip supply must be maintained, which means collecting and splitting and stacking in fall. Enough fuel to last through March, and the calculation of how much is enough is a calculation made against uncertainty, because no one knows in August how severe February will be. The animals must be fed and watered twice daily, regardless of temperature. The water barrel must be broken free of ice each morning before it can provide water for any other purpose. The door must be opened and closed quickly to prevent the heat loss that renders the stove's work pointless. Children must be kept warm when they are inside and kept from danger when they must go out. The frontier winter is not survived passively. It is actively managed day by day and sometimes hour by hour by people who have learned to take it seriously. Spring on the plains does not come gently. It comes the way most things on the frontier come, suddenly, then abundantly. The snow melts faster than the ground can absorb the water, and the fields flood with snowmelt, and the roads become impassable with mud that thaws to ankle depth and stays there for weeks. This period is called mud season, a name that describes it without excess. Spring planting waits for mud season, which is maddening when the calendar says it is time and the ground says it is not. And then the mud dries and the soil warms, and the first green comes up through the dead brown grass, with a speed that surprises even people who have seen it before. The prairie in April goes from brown to green in what feels like a week. The meadowlarks return to make their claim on the mornings. The sense of release is not small. In May, the wildflowers. This is the thing about the plains that does not appear in the hardship accounts, or appears in them briefly, as if the beauty requires permission that the difficulty has not yet granted. Wild indigo in purple masses along the wet ground, prairie phlox in pink and white, blue larkspur in the places where moisture collects, coneflowers in yellow and orange that will bloom through July, the grass itself, which from distance looks like a single flat thing, is in reality a collection of species: big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, little blue stem, that in late summer grows to 6 and 7 feet. A prairie tall enough to close over a person on horseback, moving in the wind with something that genuinely resembles the motion of water. Slow and inevitable and enormous. The people who stayed on the frontier stayed for the hard reasons, and they also stayed for this. In the early 1870s, you can still sometimes see buffalo, though you see them differently than your parents' generation did. The Great Southern Herd, 30 million animals that moved across the southern plains in waves so large that settlers described the ground shaking as they passed, that darkened the horizon for hours, that smelled of themselves from miles away, is being destroyed systematically, quickly, in a way that has no historical precedent. Professional hunters hired by railroad companies and the leather industry are taking hides at a rate that the arithmetic of reproduction cannot match. By the end of the decade, the southern herd will be effectively gone. In 1875, you might still see a small group at the horizon, the dust rising behind them. The low thunder of them felt in the ground before it is heard. And something in you understands that what you are looking at is the last of something, though the word for what that means has not yet been found. At night, away from any town, on the open plains, the sky does something that no person from a city has properly imagined. There is no light below to compete with what is above. No street lamps, no lit windows bright enough to obscure the darkness. The Milky Way is visible not as a suggestion or a pale smear, but as a physical structure. A river of light with genuine depth that arches from horizon to horizon in a way that makes the word galaxy suddenly make sense. On a clear night with a new moon, the stars cast enough light to read by, or near enough that the difference is not large. The settlers of the 1870s did not marvel at this, as people from lit cities would later marvel at it. The sky was simply the sky. But they noticed it. The letters mention it, off-handedly, more than you might expect. a feature of the place that was not hard and not beautiful in the way that wildflowers are beautiful, but simply there, simply vast, simply real. The plains have a specific sound that is not silence. The wind in the grass has a voice that varies with the wind's strength, the light whisper of a gentle wind moving through short grass country, the sustained rush of something stronger, the almost voice of the wind finding a gap in the soddy walls at 2 in the morning. Coyotes call at night in the particular chorus that starts with 1 and fills in until the darkness sounds full of them, which it is. Meadowlarks in the morning make the call that former settlers remember first, in old age, when asked what the frontier sounded like. Prairie dogs in the colonies that dot the short grass country bark in cascading waves at anything approaching. The plains are not quiet. They are full of their own kind of noise, a noise that is comprehensive and constant and not human, which is the distinction that matters. The land asks something of everyone who tries to live on it. Not as metaphor, as the practical reality of a landscape that is not naturally hospitable to the kind of agriculture that most settlers brought with them from the East. A landscape that punishes the ignorant with the efficiency that all honest systems employ. The sod must be broken correctly, or the seed has no earth to take. The crop must suit the rainfall, which is less than in the East and less consistent. The well must reach the water table, which varies. None of this comes with the land. It is acquired slowly through the education of failure and adjustment and accumulated seasons, the expensive education of trying something, discovering the thing it will not do, trying something else, and eventually arriving at what works, for this land, in this climate, in this particular set of conditions that is like no place else you have ever known. But the land gives too, in ways that are real and not small. The soil of the Great Plains, the dark topsoil that accumulated over 10,000 years of grass dying and decomposing and building layer by layer, is extraordinary once you reach it. Wheat planted in this soil grows differently than wheat in exhausted eastern ground. The same grass-fed earth that required so much labor to break is generous once it is broken, deep and dark and full of the patient work of millennia. This is the fundamental bargain of the frontier. A place that asked for everything, and then, if you stayed, if you learned it, if you earned your way into its particular logic, gave back what it asked for, and sometimes more. The land is not trying to destroy you. It is simply being what it is. And what it is, once you understand it, is sufficient. More than sufficient. This is what people are building, out here in the 1870s, one season at a time. The horizon on the Great Plains is not a limit. You could walk toward it all day. And in the course of the work you sometimes do, walk for miles in a direction, following a fence line or a survey stake, or the route the cattle have taken, and the horizon retreats in exact proportion to your advance, maintaining its distance with mathematical precision. This is obvious once you understand it, and remains at some level persistently strange. The horizon does not behave like a wall. It behaves like a question that recedes as you approach, which is either frustrating or liberating, depending on what you brought with you to the plains. The frontier people who thrived, more often than not, were the ones who found it liberating, who looked at the horizon and saw not the end of something, but the continuation of something, the land going on, the possibility going on, the sky going on, all of it patient and vast and waiting for whatever you are going to make of it. When the body fails, health and medicine on the frontier. The gunfight is the mythological cause of death on the American frontier, and as we have established at the start of this story, it barely registers in the actual mortality record. What kills people on the frontier in the 1870s is what kills people most places in the 1870s: infectious disease, cholera, typhoid fever, dysentery. Together, these waterborne and foodborne diseases account for more deaths in the American West than every other cause combined. Tuberculosis is everywhere and slow. Diphtheria takes children. Scarlet fever takes children. Measles, complicated by bacterial pneumonia, takes children and young mothers and working men in their 30s. The medicine of 1875 cannot cure most of what kills most people. What the era has in terms of treatment is supportive care, keeping the patient alive long enough for the disease to run its own course, and the commitment of whoever is sitting beside the bed through the night. The central medical problem of the frontier, the one that underlies most of the others, is the water supply. Germ theory is not established fact in 1875. The scientific work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch is known in specialist circles, but has not yet fully reached the understanding of the general population or the practice of most physicians. And John Snow's identification of a contaminated water pump as the source of the 1854 London cholera outbreak, which would eventually prove the transmission route of that disease, is 20 years behind and not yet acted on broadly. People on the frontier know that some water makes you sick. They know this from experience. They do not reliably know which water, or why, or how to prevent it in any systematic way. A well that has served a family safely for 3 years can become contaminated by a change in the water table or by the slow seepage from the nearby outhouse, and the change is invisible until the sickness begins. The medicine chest of the frontier household contains patent medicines, which are not medicines in the sense the word implies, but proprietary preparations sold in bottles with impressive names and more impressive claims. Hamlin's Wizard Oil promised to cure everything from rheumatism to deafness. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was given to fussy infants, and contained, among its active ingredients, a significant quantity of morphine. Dr. Pierce's golden medical discovery was for diseases of the blood and lungs. These preparations are not regulated. The Pure Food and Drug Act is 3 decades in the future, and what they contain is determined by their manufacturers without external oversight. Most contain substantial quantities of alcohol. Many contain opiates. Some contain cocaine. They are not without effect. They treat the experience of illness, sometimes quite effectively. They do not address the cause. They are the medicine that is available, and so they are used. The frontier doctor, when there is one, has credentials that vary enormously. Medical education in the United States in the 1870s is inconsistent. Some physicians have trained at legitimate medical schools with genuine clinical components. Others have essentially purchased a degree from one of the diploma mills that the era produced without shame, or apprenticed to another physician for a year, and considered themselves qualified. The frontier is not selective about this. A town of 300 people in western Kansas will accept whatever doctor is willing to come, and what the doctor is willing to do matters more than where he trained. Surgery is limited to what can be accomplished with the available tools, and the patient's ability to survive without the kind of anesthesia and infection control that would make the operation safe by any later standard. What a frontier physician in 1875 could actually do for a sick person, honestly assessed: set broken bones, which the technique for managed reliably, drain abscesses, stitch wounds. Antiseptic technique was practiced in some form by more progressive physicians, carbolic acid being available and used by those who had read Lister's work. deliver babies in difficult presentations with significant risk to mother and infant, administer supportive care, what the doctor could not do, cure infection once established in deep tissue, treat cholera, typhoid or dysentery directly, reverse appendicitis, treat pneumonia effectively, address anything requiring an understanding of germ theory that the era's medicine had not yet made clinical. The diseases that killed the most people were precisely the diseases that the medicine of the time could not touch. Childbirth on the frontier carries a mortality risk. That is, by modern standards, extraordinary, and that was accepted in the 1870s as simply the condition under which children entered the world. Maternal mortality in the United States in this period runs at somewhere between 5 and 10 deaths per 1,000 births, which means that any woman who went through multiple pregnancies was accumulating risk with each one. Puerperal fever, childbed fever, caused by bacterial infection introduced during delivery, was the primary killer of new mothers. And its cause was not generally understood. The connection between unwashed hands and infection, documented by the physician Ignaz Semmelweis in Vienna in the 1840s, and largely rejected by the medical establishment, was only beginning to gain any practical traction. A woman who survived 6 or 8 deliveries on the frontier had been competent and fortunate in proportions that history tends not to distinguish between. The rattlesnake is one of the frontier's specific medical problems, not because it kills many people. The number of deaths attributable to rattlesnake bite in the 1870s West is actually quite low, but because the treatments applied to it were almost uniformly useless and several were actively harmful. Cutting the bite and attempting to suck out the venom was the standard intervention and has no meaningful efficacy. Applying a tourniquet above the bite, another common recommendation, restricts blood flow without preventing the venom from moving through the lymphatic system. Whiskey, administered internally in quantities that seem designed more for the psychological management of the accompanying misery than for any physiological effect, also does not help. The honest treatment for a rattlesnake bite in 1875 was to keep the patient still, keep the wound clean, and wait, which is effectively the honest treatment for many things the frontier medicine of the era could not address. Dental pain on the frontier is one of the consistent, low-level miseries of the record, present in diaries and letters as a background complaint that appears and recurs and is managed rather than resolved, because resolution means extraction, and extraction means finding someone who will do it. The frontier dentist, when there is one, is typically a barber or a general practitioner who has added teeth to his services. The tools are simple: forceps in various sizes, experience, and the patient's willingness to submit to a pain that is brief, complete, and effective. Dental pain before the extraction that resolves it is one of the things the 1870s frontier shared across all demographics and all levels of prosperity. A toothache does not respond to wealth or status, and the treatment is available to everyone at the same level of comfort, which is none. Tuberculosis, called consumption in the 1870s, named for the way the disease seemed to consume the person from inside over months or years, without mercy and without remission, is the chronic disease of the era. It kills 1 in 7 Americans during the 19th century, and the frontier is not exempt from this proportion. The West does have a reputation by the 1870s as a place where consumptives might come for the dry air, which was believed to slow the disease's progression. Some people came west to get well. Some of them did for a time. The clean, dry air of the Southwest genuinely differs from the coal smoke heavy air of eastern industrial cities. and the difference may have mattered at the margins. People came west to get well and got better than they would have elsewhere, and then got worse again, and the tuberculosis killed them in a better climate than the one they would have died in otherwise. The home medicine kit is a reasonable collection of what works, what doesn't, and what is believed to work assembled without discrimination based on their effectiveness. Castor oil, a legitimate laxative, serves the intestinal complaints that are common in a community with imperfect water hygiene. Camphor, used as a chest rub for respiratory illness, smells medicinal in a reassuring way and does approximately nothing to the illness itself. Laudanum, for pain, genuine, effective, addictive, and the addiction not yet regarded as the medical and social problem it will later become. Turpentine, applied to wounds, which is both mildly antiseptic and damaging to the tissue it contacts. Peppermint oil, genuinely effective for nausea. Mustard plasters applied to the chest for respiratory illness with the same logic as the camphor rub and the same outcome. The home medicine kit is the medical system for most families in most circumstances, and it is used with the same faith that people of all eras bring to what their world offers them. When someone in the community is seriously ill, the community responds with a practical generosity that is one of the frontier's best qualities. Neighbors come. The sick household receives food, because a household whose central person is down cannot feed itself. Children are taken if the parents need to care for the ill without distraction. The essential animal work is covered. Someone with nursing experience, which on the frontier means a woman who has managed her own household through illness, not someone with formal training, takes shifts at the bedside. The intimacy of this, the sitting with someone through fever and delirium, and the slow return or the slow departure, was one of the things that bound frontier communities together in ways that were remembered clearly and felt long after the immediate occasion had passed. Death on the frontier is a domestic event in the most literal sense. It happens at home, in the same room where the person slept, tended by the same people who tended them living. The body is prepared for burial by the family, washed, dressed in the best available clothing, laid out for viewing in the home. A coffin is built, if lumber can be obtained, by the nearest person with tools and ability. Burial happens in the churchyard if there is a church close enough, or in the section of ground near the homestead designated for this purpose, the family plot on a slight rise, or under the cottonwood, or at the edge of the field, the location chosen for reasons that the family understood and that were not always written down. The grave marker is wood in most cases, because stone is scarce on the plains, which means the marker is temporary in ways that the person buried beneath it was not. The emotional processing of death on the frontier is compressed by the ongoing demands of the work. There are crops to plant, and animals to tend, and children to feed, and the dead do not release the living from these obligations by dying. What the frontier produced, in terms of grief, was a functional grief. Mourning conducted in the margins of the continuing work, in the evenings, in the silences that open between tasks. Women's diaries of the period record this in the same matter-of-fact tone used for weather and garden updates. November 14th. Baby Ellen died this morning. November 15th. Baked bread, churned butter, mended William's shirt. The brevity is not coldness. It is the writing of a person who has understood that tomorrow requires them, and that understanding is what the frontier asks for and what it receives. What the frontier had, in the absence of effective formal medicine, was each other. And this is not a small thing. The neighbour who sat up through the night with the feverish child while the parents slept and would need to work in the morning. The woman who knew which herb from the creek bank actually reduced fever. from her mother's knowledge and her grandmother's before that. The collective wisdom of a community paying close attention to a specific place over time, which springs were safe to drink from and which were not, acquired through the expensive education of experience. This knowledge was not nothing. It was not science in the formal sense, but it was the accumulated practical understanding of people observing carefully and remembering accurately, and it saved lives in ways that the patent medicine bottles did not. But here is what the mortality record of the frontier does not capture: the survival rate. The majority of the people who went to the frontier in the 1870s survived it. They survived the cold and the drought and the bad water years, and the childhood illnesses that took some of their children, and the childbirth that took some of their wives, and the accidents that took fingers and sometimes more. They survived because they were careful, because they were competent, because their communities supported them through the worst of it, and because the frontier selected for persistence in a way that produced people of extraordinary endurance. The body on the frontier, pushed and tested and sometimes broken, was doing something that the mythology of the gunfighter could never contain. It was building something that would last. The medicine of the 1870s frontier was limited, and this is simply true. People died of things that would not kill them today, at ages that were not old, from causes that modern understanding would have prevented or addressed. This is not arguable. But within that limitation, people cared for each other with a completeness that had no institution behind it, only the human understanding that suffering called for presence, that sickness called for help, that the person in the bed was someone known, and that what was known of them deserved the fullness of whatever care could be given. The frontier was hard on bodies. It was also, in this particular way, one of the places where bodies were most carefully tended by the people who loved them. The day turns toward evening. The sun is lower now. You can tell not by looking at it directly. You learned some time ago not to do that. But by the quality of the light, the way it has shifted from the flat, overhead brightness of afternoon into something with an angle and a warmth to it, something that hits the grass differently and makes the dust in the air visible as a fine golden suspension. The long part of the working day is over, or close enough. Not because everything is finished, everything is never finished on the frontier, but because the light is going, and the things that can wait until tomorrow will wait. There is a permission in the lowering light that the frontier usually does not offer. You take it. The last chores happen with the particular efficiency of things done often enough to have no conscious process left in them. The chickens have put themselves in for the night, as chickens do, finding their roost as the light drops without requiring assistance or instruction. You close the enclosure and latch it, the same latch your hand has found in this motion 1,000 times. And the sound of the chickens settling is quieter than their daytime sound, lower and more interior. The horse gets the evening water and the evening hay, and in the pouring and the scattering there is the same motion as this morning, reversed, the beginning and the end of the day, making mirror images of each other. The work that holds everything in its reliable shape. Supper is quieter than the other meals. The bread from this morning, if any is left, and the beans that have been on the back of the stove since before noon, tender now and savoury in a way they were not at midday. The cast-iron skillet contributes whatever it has been asked to contribute today. The family gathers, or most of it. There is always someone at the edge of sleep, or someone who ate earlier and is already fading against the wall. The table holds the meal, the lamp holds the light. Outside the single window, the sky is beginning its transition from the blue of afternoon to the particular deepening blue that precedes dark. The supper conversation is low. Not sad, not burdened, just tired in the honest way that follows a day of physical work. Quiet in the way that means the talking has been used up, and the remaining energy belongs to the eating. Washing up after supper is quick. The pot goes back on the stove with a little water in it to loosen what the cooking left behind. The dishes are wiped, or washed in whatever water is already heated, or stacked for the morning when fresh water is easier, and the energy to deal with them is less depleted. The table is cleared. The leftover bread goes into the bread box. The skillet's drippings are transferred to the jar beside the stove, as they are every night, as they have been every night since you set up this kitchen, such as it is, in this house, such as it is. These are small motions, the smallest of the day's work, and they are done mostly without looking, by hands that have done them in this order, in this space so many times that the space and the hands have come to an understanding. The children go to bed, not all at once, and not without the negotiation that children bring to the transition between waking and sleeping, as if it were a question worth arguing every time. The youngest ones are already there, claimed by sleep before supper was fully cleared, a small warm weight in the sleeping corner. The older ones require the specific gentle insistence that produces compliance without drama. The one time, not twice. The tone that says, this is not optional, but is not a punishment. They settle. The quilts come up. The breathing from the sleeping corner changes from the sound of wakefulness to the sound of sleep. Gradually, the way light changes, by such small degrees that there is no single moment you can point to when it happened, and then it has. The quiet after the children are down is something you have been moving toward all day without knowing quite that you were. It is not silence. The stove is still talking to itself. The wind is still present outside. The house makes its small nighttime sounds of settling and adjustment, but it is a different quality of quiet than the day provided. You sit near the lamp. There may be a book. There are not many books on the frontier, but there are some, and the ones that exist are read until they are known by heart, and then read again. There may be mending. There may be the letter you have been composing in your head for 2 weeks, and have not yet committed to paper. The lamp's small circle of light holds you and whatever you have brought into it. And outside the circle, the room is darker. And outside the room, the frontier night is settling in. The fire is banked before you sleep. This is the last domestic act of the day, the careful adjustment of the stove's damper, so the fire does not go out entirely, but does not burn through all the remaining fuel before morning. Too much air, and it burns hot and fast and is ash by 2 in the morning, which means the house is freezing by 3. Too little, and it smothers itself, and the house is also freezing by 3. The art of banking a fire is the art of leaving it exactly enough to breathe on through the hours of your sleep. And you know this stove now. The particular resistance of this damper at the right position, the specific sound the fire makes when it is adjusted correctly, the way you know any tool that has been in your hands long enough to become an extension of them. You go to bed. The particular weight of the day, the physical weight that is distributed through the muscles in a way that is specific to what you did today, what you lifted, how you moved, settles into the mattress with you, and the quilt comes up, and the lamp has been out for a few minutes, and the room is dark except for the narrow line of dim orange from the stove's damper vent. The room smells of the evening. the lamp oil still warm in its cooling, the banked fire's smoke, the people sleeping in it, the earth in the walls that never stops being earth, never stops smelling of what it came from, and what it continues to be. These are the smells of this place. This specific place, made from this specific land, holding these specific people through another night on the frontier. Outside, the prairie night is vast and full of its own patient activities. The coyotes will call later. They do not begin until the dark is complete and established, until the last residual light has left the western sky, and the stars have achieved full presence overhead. A nighthawk passes, making its particular booming sound, diving and pulling up. The grass moves in the wind, the same motion it makes in daylight, indifferent to the absence of anyone watching. The stars are out now, all of them, overhead and to every horizon, the Milky Way doing what it does on a clear plains night, which is everything. You are here. The day was long, and the work was real, and the life is hard in the particular ways that this life is hard, and you made it through, as you have made it through the days before this one. The frontier asked what it always asks. Your answer was enough. The fire is slow. The children are sleeping. Rest. Let the day go now. Whatever remains of it, the unfinished thought, the tomorrow list that assembles itself at the edges of the mind, let it go. There is nothing more to do with the day. It has been used completely, the way things on the frontier are used, all the way down to the last useful portion of it. You are warm. The fire is banked and slow. The people you love are breathing in the dark nearby. The frontier is outside and the frontier can wait. The prairie night is doing what the prairie night does, wide and still and full of the particular quiet that is not silence but is close enough for sleep. The wind has softened to something almost gentle, a presence rather than a force, the long grass moving in it out there in the dark, the same slow-breathing motion it made in the afternoon, and will make tomorrow morning and the morning after. It does not need you to be watching. It will continue whether you watch it or not. Your breathing slows. You feel the weight of yourself in the mattress, the particular heaviness of a body that has been fully used, that has nothing left to give tonight, and does not need to. The hands that worked all day are still now. The feet are still. The mind is slowing down toward the speed of the wind, toward the slow, patient pace of grass moving, toward the pace of things that are not in a hurry because they have nowhere else to be. Let the stars do what stars do. Let the coyotes somewhere out in the dark call to each other across the plains. That sound has nothing to do with you tonight. You are inside. The fire is slow and steady. The children are sleeping. The animals are settled in the lean-to. Everything that needed doing today has been done. Everything that needs doing tomorrow can wait until tomorrow comes to collect it, which it will. At the same cold, early hour it always comes, and you will meet it as you always do. But not yet. For now, just this, the warm dark, the slow breath, the enormous quiet of the frontier night pressing gently against the walls out of the small house you have made from the land itself, the grass and the wind and the stars and the distance and the dark. Sleep well. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments. If you're drifting off, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you wake up. Sleep well.